"When I grow up, I'll marry you," she told the Duke. 18 years later, they met again at the turn of the year. If you believe in promises made under childhood stars, in loves that survive time and silence, then stay with this story. Subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. This is a tale that will break you open and put you back together. England, December 31st, 1856. Rosewood Hall, 11:47 p.m. The conservatory smelled of damp earth and jasmine, a fragrance so sweet it bordered on melancholy. Emma Ashford stood alone among the ferns and climbing roses, her gloved fingers tracing the edge of a marble planter. The glass walls around her were fogged with condensation, turning the ballroom beyond into a blurred painting of golden light and swirling silhouettes. She shouldn't be here. She should be inside, smiling politely at strangers, pretending she belonged. But the weight of too many eyes, curious, judgmental, sharp, had driven her out into the cold green sanctuary of the conservatory. Here at least she could breathe. Her gown was pale blue silk, modest by the standards of the era, with long sleeves and a high neckline trimmed in ivory lace. Her blonde hair was pinned in soft waves at the nape of her neck, a few rebellious curls escaping to frame her face. She looked like a watercolor left out in the rain, beautiful but fading. Emma closed her eyes. The sounds of the ballroom were muffled here. Violins, laughter, the rhythmic shuffle of dancing feet. She could almost pretend she was somewhere else, somewhere far from England, somewhere the name Ashford didn't carry the stench of scandal. But then the door opened. The creak of hinges cut through the stillness like a blade. Emma's eyes snapped open, her breath catching in her throat. She turned slowly, her heart pounding against the rigid boning of her corset. A man stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black tailcoat that fit him like a second skin, every line sharp and deliberate. His cravat was perfectly knotted, his gloves charcoal grey, dark hair combed back with precision, a jaw that looked carved from stone, and eyes, God, his eyes, dark as winter nights, unreadable and fixed entirely on her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Emma's pulse roared in her ears. She knew she should speak, should apologize for intruding, should curtsy and excuse herself, but her body refused to obey. Because something in the way he looked at her, something in the stillness of his posture, the slight parting of his lips, felt like recognition. Impossible. She didn't know this man. Did she? He took a step forward. The sound of his polished boots against the stone floor echoed softly. His gaze never left her face, scanning her features with an intensity that made her skin flush hot beneath the layers of silk and linen. "Emma." The word was barely a whisper. Rough, broken, as if it had been dragged from somewhere deep inside him. Her breath stopped. No one had called her that in years, not since she'd left England, not since she'd become Miss Ashford, the forgotten daughter, the exile. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She stared at him, her mind racing, trying to place the face, the voice, the way he said her name like a prayer. And then, oh God, then she saw it. The faint scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened when he was holding something back, the shadow of a boy she'd once known hidden beneath the armor of a man who'd learned not to feel. Charles? His name tasted like summer nights and broken promises. Like childhood and loss and something she'd buried so deep, she'd almost convinced herself it was a dream. He didn't answer. He just stood there, frozen, his hands curling into fists at his sides. The muscle in his jaw ticked, once, twice. And then his eyes, those impossibly dark eyes, dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second, before snapping back up. "I thought you were dead," he said quietly. The words hit her like a physical blow. Emma flinched, her hand gripping the edge of the planter for balance. No, I've been in France. For 18 years. Yes. Silence. Heavy and suffocating. The jasmine suddenly smelled too sweet, cloying, like flowers left too long in a sealed room. Charles took another step closer, then another. The space between them shrank until she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the exhaustion carved into his face like something he wore instead of sleep. "You disappeared," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "One day you were there, the next. Nothing. No letters. No word. I searched for you. For years, Emma. And you were just... What? Hiding in France?" "I wasn't hiding," she whispered, though the lie tasted bitter. "My family was disgraced, I know." His tone was clipped, controlled, but she heard the fracture beneath it. "Your father's debts, the scandal. I know all of it. Then you understand why I couldn't stay." "No." He shook his head, his gaze burning into hers. "I don't." Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to look away, to run, to do anything but stand here under the weight of his stare. But she couldn't move, because 18 years ago she'd made him a promise, a foolish, impossible, childish promise. "When I grow up, I'll marry you." And now, standing in this conservatory on the last night of the year, she realized he hadn't forgotten. Neither had she. "You've changed," she said softly, because she didn't know what else to say. A bitter smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "So have you. I'm not a child anymore." "No." His eyes raked over her face, her hair, the pale curve of her neck above the lace collar. Not in a way that objectified, but in a way that memorized. "You're not." Emma swallowed hard. The air between them felt charged, electric, like the moment before lightning struck. She could feel the heat radiating from him even though he hadn't touched her. Could hear the faint hitch in his breathing. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I could ask you the same question." "I was invited. By my cousin. She thought it might be good for me to reintegrate into society." Charles laughed. A short, humorless sound. "Reintegrate. As if you could just step back into a world that condemned you." "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice, Emma." "Not for people like me." His expression darkened. He stepped closer still, so close now that she could smell him, rain and cedar and something richer, earthier, tobacco maybe, or leather, something distinctly, undeniably him. "People like you," he repeated slowly. "You mean people who ran away?" The accusation stung. Emma's hands trembled as she pulled them behind her back, hiding the evidence of how much his words affected her. "I was 7 years old when my father destroyed everything. What would you have had me do? Stay and be mocked, pitied, turned into a cautionary tale for every debutante in London? You could have trusted me. You were 12, Charles. I would have protected you." "How?" The word came out sharper than she intended, tinged with desperation and old grief. "How could you have protected me? You were a boy. I was a child. And the world..." Her voice broke. "The world doesn't care about promises made by children." Something flickered across his face then. Pain. Raw and unguarded. It lasted only a second before he locked it away again, his features smoothing into that impenetrable mask he wore so well. "You're right," he said quietly. "I was just a boy." Emma's heart twisted. She wanted to reach out, to touch his hand, to tell him she hadn't meant it that way. But the distance between them felt insurmountable now, even though they stood less than 2 feet apart. "Why did you come to the conservatory?" she asked again, softer this time. Charles's gaze drifted to the fogged glass walls, the jungle of green around them. "I needed air. The ballroom was..." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "Suffocating." "Yes," she breathed. "It is." His eyes snapped back to hers, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw the boy he'd been, the lonely, angry boy who'd hidden in gardens and climbed trees to escape the weight of his father's expectations. "Do you remember the fountain?" he asked suddenly. Emma's breath hitched. "Yes. You told me you'd marry me. I was 7. You promised." Her chest ached. "Charles, I waited for you." His voice was rough now, all pretense of control slipping. "I waited for years. Every ball, every season, I thought, maybe this time, maybe she'll come back, maybe..." He stopped, his hands flexing at his sides. "But you never did. I couldn't. Or you didn't want to. That's not fair." "Fair." He laughed again, bitter and broken. "Nothing about this is fair, Emma. You left. I stayed. And now you walk back into my life on the last night of the year looking like... He didn't finish. But the way he looked at her, like she was a ghost, a dream, a wound that had never healed, said everything. Emma's eyes burned. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears fall. I shouldn't have come tonight. No, Charles said quietly. You shouldn't have. The words were meant to hurt, and they did. Emma felt them lodge somewhere deep in her chest, sharp and cold. She turned away, her skirts rustling softly as she moved toward the door. But then his voice stopped her. Emma. She froze, her hand on the door handle. Stay. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. She turned slowly, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Charles stood exactly where she'd left him, his hands still clenched at his sides, his expression unreadable except for his eyes. His eyes begged. Why? She whispered. Because if you leave now, I'll spend the next 18 years wondering what would have happened if you'd stayed. The clock in the ballroom began to chime. Midnight. The sound echoed through the conservatory, slow and deliberate, each toll marking the death of the old year and the birth of the new. Emma looked at Charles, at the boy she'd loved, at the man he'd become, and made a choice. She let go of the door handle and stayed. The chimes faded into silence, leaving only the muffled sounds of celebration from the ballroom, cheers, glasses clinking, the swell of violins playing a waltz to mark the new year. But here, in the conservatory, time felt suspended, frozen between what was and what could never be. Emma stood with her back to the door, her hand still hovering where the handle had been. She could feel Charles's gaze on her like a physical touch, heavy and searching. Her pulse hammered in her throat. You stayed, he said quietly. She turned to face him. You asked me to. I didn't think you would. Neither did I. The honesty hung between them, raw and exposed. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the conservatory. The glass walls trapped the heat from the house, but she felt it nowhere, only the chill of his stare. Charles took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling beneath the tailcoat. The candlelight from the ballroom beyond cast shifting shadows across his face, making him look older, harder, like something had been carved out of him and never replaced. Why did you come back? He asked. His voice was quieter now, stripped of the anger that had sharpened it moments before. After all this time, why now? Emma hesitated. The truth felt too heavy, too complicated, but lies had never come easily to her. My grandmother died 6 months ago. She was the only family I had left in France. Something flickered in his expression, not quite sympathy, but close. I'm sorry. Don't be. She lived a long life. A good one. Emma's fingers twisted in the folds of her skirt, seeking something to hold on to. But when she passed, I realized I had nothing keeping me there anymore. No roots, no purpose, just emptiness. So you came back to England. My cousin wrote to me. She said enough time had passed. That society might be willing to forget what my father did if I was discreet, if I kept my head down and didn't make trouble. She laughed softly, bitterly. As if I ever made trouble. Charles's jaw tightened. Your father's sins were never yours to carry. Tell that to the women who wouldn't look at me tonight, or the men who whispered behind their gloves when I entered the room. Emma met his gaze steadily, though it cost her. The name Ashford is still poison here, Charles. Some stains don't wash out. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face as if looking for the girl he'd known, the one who'd laughed without fear, who'd chased him through gardens and declared impossible things with absolute certainty. You were never poison to me, he said finally. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through her chest. Emma's breath caught. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself feel the warmth of that statement. But 18 years of exile had taught her not to trust beautiful words. You say that now, she whispered, but you didn't come looking for me. Charles flinched as if she'd struck him. I told you, I searched for years, and then you stopped, because I thought you were dead. The words tore out of him, rough and desperate. Your family vanished, Emma. The estate was sold. Your mother remarried some French merchant and disappeared to Lyon. There were rumors. He stopped, his hands curling into fists again. There were rumors you died of fever, that you drowned, that your father had taken you somewhere no one would ever find you. Emma's throat constricted. She'd never known, never imagined that her disappearance had left such a wound. I didn't know anyone was looking. I was. Charles took a step closer, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. Every ball, every season. I looked for you in every blonde girl I saw, in every laugh that sounded like yours, in every... He stopped himself, his jaw working as he fought for control. I looked for you everywhere, Emma, and you were nowhere. Guilt twisted in her stomach, sharp and bitter. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. He shook his head, the movement sharp. You were a child. You did what you had to do. So did you. Did I? A bitter smile touched his lips, there and gone like a ghost. I'm not so sure. Emma studied him in the dim light. The boy she remembered had been thin, all sharp angles and nervous energy. This man was different, broader, harder. There was a weariness in him that went bone deep, a kind of exhaustion that came from carrying too much for too long. What happened to you? She asked softly. Charles's gaze snapped to hers, guarded. What do you mean? You're different, not just older. It's... She struggled to find the words. It's like something broke inside you and never healed properly. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. His expression shuttered completely, that aristocratic mask sliding back into place. But then he exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping just a fraction. My father died 3 years ago, he said quietly. I became the Duke of Winterbourne, and I learned very quickly that the title comes with expectations, responsibilities, debts, not the monetary kind, but the kind you owe to a legacy. To a name. He paused, his gaze distant. I learned that men like me don't get to choose our own paths. We inherit them. Emma's heart ached. She wanted to reach out, to touch his hand, to offer some kind of comfort, but she didn't dare. Not yet. You sound like you hate it. I do. The admission came swift and sharp, as if he'd been holding it in for years. Every day I wake up in that house, surrounded by portraits of men who came before me, all of them expecting me to be something I'm not. Something I'll never be. And what's that? Cold, unfeeling, perfect. He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. My father spent 30 years molding me into his image, beating the softness out of me, teaching me that emotion is weakness and weakness is death. His eyes found hers again, and in them she saw a pain so deep it stole her breath. He succeeded mostly, except for one thing. What? Emma whispered. You. The words settled between them like a confession, like a wound laid bare. Emma's hands trembled. She pressed them together, fingers interlaced, trying to still the shaking. Charles, you were the one thing he couldn't take from me, he continued, his voice rough. The one memory he couldn't poison. Every time he told me I was worthless, every time he locked me in that study and made me recite lineages until my voice gave out, I thought of you, of that night by the fountain, of the way you looked at me like I mattered. Tears burned behind her eyes. Emma blinked rapidly, refusing to let them fall. You did matter. Did I? His smile was sad, broken. Then why did you never write? The question was a knife, slipping between her ribs with surgical precision. Emma's breath hitched. I couldn't. My mother. She forbade it. She said any connection to England would only make things worse, that we had to disappear completely if we wanted to survive. And you listened. I was 7, Charles. I didn't have a choice. You were 10, 12, 15, 20. Each age was a punctuation mark, a reminder of all the years that had passed. At some point, Emma, you had a choice, and you chose not to reach out. The accusation stung because it was true, partially at least. There had been moments, hundreds of them, when she'd thought about writing to him, when she'd sat at her grandmother's writing desk with paper and ink, trying to find the words. But fear had always stopped her. Fear that he'd forgotten. Fear that he'd moved on. Fear that she'd become nothing more than a childhood memory, too small and fragile to survive the weight of reality. "You're right," she said quietly. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "That you wouldn't remember me, that you wouldn't care." She forced herself to meet his gaze, even though it hurt. "That I'd write to you and get nothing back, and that silence would break something in me I couldn't afford to lose." Charles stared at her for a long moment. The anger in his eyes softened, replaced by something more complicated, something that looked almost like understanding. "I would have written back," he said finally. "Every time. I would have written back." Emma's chest tightened. "I know that now. Does it change anything?" She wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that knowing could undo 18 years of absence. But the truth was more complicated. They weren't children anymore. They were strangers wearing the faces of people they used to know. "I don't know," she whispered. Charles nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. He turned away from her, his gaze drifting to the fogged glass walls. Beyond them, the ballroom blazed with light and laughter, a world neither of them belonged to anymore. "My father arranged a marriage for me," he said suddenly, his voice flat. "Before he died, a contract with the Harrington family, Lady Beatrice Harrington." Emma's stomach dropped. Of course there was someone else. He was a duke, 30 years old, handsome, wealthy, titled. It would be stranger if there wasn't a woman waiting in the wings. "When?" she asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "The engagement will be announced in 6 weeks, the wedding 3 months after that." 6 weeks. Such a short time. Such an impossible stretch of days. "Do you love her?" Emma didn't know why she asked, didn't know if she wanted the answer. Charles turned back to her, his expression unreadable. No. Relief flooded through her, swift and irrational. She had no right to feel it, no claim on him. But her heart didn't care about logic. Then why? "Because it's what's expected. Because the Harrington dowry will save the estate. Because—" He stopped, his jaw working. "Because I'm tired of fighting, Emma. I'm tired of pretending there's any other path for me." "So you'll just marry her? Spend the rest of your life with someone you don't love?" "Yes." The word was final. Absolute. Emma shook her head, disbelief and anger warring inside her. "That's not living, Charles. That's surrender." "Maybe." He stepped closer, close enough now that she could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "But at least it's a life I understand. A life with rules and expectations and no surprises." His eyes locked onto hers, dark and intense. "No ghosts walking back into conservatories and reminding me of everything I've lost." The words were meant to wound, and they did. Emma straightened her spine, lifting her chin. "Then I'll leave. I'll go back to the ballroom, make my excuses, and you'll never have to see me again." She turned toward the door. "Don't." His voice stopped her. Again. Emma closed her eyes, her hand on the door handle. "You can't keep doing this, Charles, pushing me away and pulling me back. It's cruel." "I know." She heard him move closer, felt the heat of him at her back. "But I can't let you walk away again, not yet. Not when I just found you." Slowly, Emma turned. Charles stood inches away now, so close she could count the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, could smell cedar and rain and something deeper, something that made her knees weak. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. His gaze dropped to her lips, lingered. His breathing grew uneven, his chest rising and falling with barely controlled restraint. "I don't know," he said hoarsely, "but I have 6 weeks to figure it out." The clock chimed once, marking the quarter hour. 1857 had arrived, and with it, a countdown neither of them could stop. Emma couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand there, trapped between the door and the man who'd just upended every carefully constructed wall she'd built over 18 years. 6 weeks. The words echoed in her mind like a death sentence, or a promise. She wasn't sure which. Charles hadn't stepped back, hadn't moved at all, actually. He remained close, too close by the standards of propriety, his eyes still fixed on her face with an intensity that made her skin flush hot beneath her gown. 6 weeks, she repeated softly, testing the weight of it. And then what? His jaw tightened. Then I marry Lady Beatrice. I fulfill my duty, and life continues as it was always meant to. Without me. Yes. The finality in that single word should have hurt more than it did, should have felt like rejection. But instead, Emma heard something else beneath it, something desperate and broken. He didn't want this life, but he'd resigned himself to it. Then why tell me at all, she asked, her voice barely audible over the distant strains of music. Why not just let me leave? Let me disappear back to France, or wherever else the wind takes me. Charles's eyes darkened. His hand lifted, slowly, hesitantly, and for one breathless moment Emma thought he might touch her face, but he stopped himself, his fingers curling into a fist inches from her cheek. The restraint in that aborted gesture spoke louder than words. Because, he said roughly, I've spent 18 years haunted by what I didn't say, what I didn't do, and I won't make that mistake again. What does that mean? It means... He stopped, his throat working as he swallowed hard. It means I need to know. Before I chain myself to a life I don't want, I need to know if you feel anything at all, or if that little girl who promised to marry me died somewhere along the way. Emma's heart stuttered. The question hung between them, sharp and unavoidable. She could lie, could tell him that childhood promises meant nothing, that she'd moved on, forgotten, become someone else entirely. But she'd never been good at lying, especially not to him. She didn't die, Emma whispered. She just learned not to hope. Something cracked in Charles's expression. The mask slipped just for a second, and she saw the raw vulnerability beneath it. The boy who'd hidden in gardens, the man who'd searched for her in every face. Then hope now, he said hoarsely. For 6 weeks. Hope with me. And then we let go. The words should have been enough. A clear boundary, a defined ending. But Emma felt the impossibility of it settling into her bones. Because she knew, God, she knew, that 6 weeks wouldn't be enough. 6 years wouldn't be enough. Some things, once started, couldn't be neatly concluded. This is madness, she breathed. I know. It will only hurt more in the end. I know. Then why? Because I'd rather have 6 weeks of something real than a lifetime of wondering what if. His voice dropped to a whisper, rough and broken. Wouldn't you? Emma closed her eyes. Every rational part of her screamed to walk away, to protect herself, to refuse this beautiful, terrible offer and save what little of her heart remained intact. But the irrational part, the part that had loved him when she was 7 and never quite stopped, that part was already reaching for him. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I would. When she opened her eyes, Charles was staring at her as if she'd just given him something precious and fragile, something he didn't quite know how to hold without breaking. Then we have an agreement, he said quietly. What kind of agreement? 6 weeks, no promises beyond that, no expectations of a future we can't have. His gaze held hers, steady and sure. But for these 6 weeks, we're honest, completely honest. No more running, no more hiding, just truth. Emma's throat tightened. And at the end? At the end, we say goodbye. I marry Lady Beatrice. You return to your life. And we don't look back. It was the most logical plan she'd ever heard. And the most heartbreaking. All right, she said softly. 6 weeks of truth. Charles exhaled slowly, as if he'd been holding his breath. His shoulders dropped a fraction, some of the tension bleeding out of him. But his eyes still burned with something dangerous and unspoken. I should take you back to the ballroom, he said. People will notice we're both missing. Let them notice. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Spoken like someone who's forgotten how vicious London society can be. I haven't forgotten. Emma straightened her spine, lifting her chin in defiance of the judgment she knew awaited her. I just don't care anymore. You should. They'll tear you apart if they sense weakness. Then I won't show them any. Charles studied her for a long moment, something like admiration flickering in his expression. You've grown strong. I had to. Exile doesn't leave room for softness. No, he agreed quietly. I suppose it doesn't. He offered her his arm, a formal gesture, proper and distant. But when Emma slipped her gloved hand into the crook of his elbow, she felt the tension in his muscles, felt the way he stiffened at her touch, as if even that small contact was almost too much to bear. They walked toward the door together, their footsteps muffled by the damp stone floor. The conservatory felt different now, less like a sanctuary and more like a threshold. A place where endings became beginnings. Charles paused at the door, his hand on the brass handle. Emma, she looked up at him. Yes? Whatever happens in these 6 weeks, whatever we say or do, he hesitated, his jaw working. I need you to know that none of it changes what must happen at the end. I know. I mean it. I won't break the engagement. Too many people depend on that alliance. The estate, the tenants, the legacy. Charles. Emma placed her free hand over his, silencing him. I understand. I'm not asking you to save me. I'm not asking for a fairy tale. I'm just asking for 6 weeks of honesty. That's all. He stared at her hand on his breathing shallow. You deserve more than that. Perhaps, but I'll take what I can get. Something painful flickered across his face, but he nodded, accepting her words even as they clearly wounded him. He opened the door. The ballroom hit them like a wave. Heat, light, noise, the overwhelming press of bodies and perfume and expectation. Emma blinked against the sudden brightness, her eyes adjusting slowly. The waltz had ended. Couples were dispersing, laughing, fanning themselves in the oppressive warmth. And then she felt it. The stairs. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. Eyes turning in their direction, curiosity sharpening into speculation, whispers spreading like wildfire through the crowd. The Duke of Winterbourne, with a woman, alone. Who is she? Did you see where they came from? The conservatory, together, scandalous. Emma's hand tightened on Charles's arm, her spine stiffening. She felt the weight of judgment settling over her like a suffocating blanket. Felt the names forming on lips she couldn't see. Ashford, the traitor's daughter, the exile. But Charles didn't flinch, didn't release her or step away or offer any explanation. He simply walked forward, his posture rigid with aristocratic authority, guiding her through the crowd as if daring anyone to question him. They were halfway across the ballroom when a woman stepped into their path. She was beautiful in the way expensive things were beautiful, polished, perfect, cold. Dark hair piled high in an elaborate coiffure, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. Her gown was deep emerald silk, cut to emphasize her figure while remaining within the bounds of modesty. She smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. Your Grace, she said, her voice smooth as honey. I was beginning to worry you'd abandoned the festivities entirely. Charles stopped. Emma felt him tense beside her, his muscles turning to stone. Lady Beatrice, Happy New Year. Lady Beatrice. The name landed like a stone in Emma's stomach. This was her. The woman Charles was meant to marry, the woman whose dowry would save his estate, the woman who would share his name, his home, his life. She was everything Emma wasn't. Titled, wealthy, accepted, perfect. And who is this? Lady Beatrice's gaze slid to Emma, cool and assessing. Not hostile exactly. Just measuring, deciding whether Emma was worth acknowledging at all. Miss Emma Ashford, Charles said, his tone carefully neutral. An old family friend. Friend. The word felt like a lie. But Emma forced a polite smile, curtsying slightly. Lady Beatrice, a pleasure. Ashford. Beatrice's eyes narrowed, recognition sparking. I don't believe I'm familiar with that family. You wouldn't be, Emma said quietly. We've been abroad for many years. How exotic, the word dripped with condescension. And what brings you back to England? Family matters. I see, Beatrice's smile sharpened. Well, I do hope you'll enjoy your stay. London can be unforgiving to those who don't understand its complexities. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Emma felt it settle between them like a drawn blade. I'm quite familiar with London's complexities, Emma said evenly. I was born here after all. Were you? Beatrice tilted her head, feigning surprise. How curious that we've never met. Not so curious. As I said, I've been abroad. For 18 years, I understand. Beatrice's gaze flicked to Charles, then back to Emma. That's quite a long absence. One might wonder what kept you away so long. Emma's jaw tightened. The implication was clear. What scandal? What shame? What reason did you have to flee? But before she could respond, Charles spoke. Miss Ashford's family faced difficulties, he said quietly, his voice hard as iron. Circumstances beyond her control. I'm sure you, of all people, understand how swiftly fortunes can change. It was a warning, subtle but unmistakable. Beatrice's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she recovered. Of course, she said smoothly. How silly of me. I meant no offense. None taken, Emma lied. An awkward silence descended. The music swelled around them, couples beginning to form for the next dance. Beatrice's gaze remained fixed on Charles, expectant. Your Grace, she said sweetly. You did promise me the first waltz of the new year. Charles hesitated. Emma felt it, the moment of indecision, the war between obligation and desire. His hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her arm. I did, he said finally, reluctantly. Beatrice extended her hand, victorious. Then shall we? Charles looked down at Emma. For a moment their eyes met, and she saw the apology there, the frustration, the helplessness. Go, Emma said softly. I'll be fine. It was a lie, but a necessary one. Charles released her arm slowly, as if severing something vital. He took Beatrice's hand, allowing her to lead him onto the dance floor. Emma watched them go, her chest tight. They made a striking couple, the dark-haired beauty and the brooding duke. They moved together with practiced ease, their steps perfectly synchronized. Beatrice's hand rested on his shoulder, her smile brilliant and possessive. Emma turned away before she could see more, before the image could burn itself into her memory and haunt her later. She found a quiet corner near the terrace doors, half hidden behind a marble column. From there she could observe without being observed, could watch the glittering crowd without having to navigate it. Quite a spectacle, isn't it? Emma startled, turning to find a man standing beside her. He was older, perhaps 40, with greying hair and kind eyes. His evening clothes were well made but understated, suggesting wealth without ostentation. I'm sorry, Emma said. The dance, the politics, the endless performance. He gestured vaguely at the ballroom. Sometimes I think we're all just actors in a play we didn't audition for. Despite herself, Emma smiled. That's remarkably astute. I have my moments. He extended his hand. Lord Benjamin Thornhill, and you must be the mysterious Miss Ashford everyone's whispering about. Emma's smile faded. Am I really so interesting? You arrived with the Duke of Winterbourne, emerged from the conservatory together, and managed to draw Lady Beatrice's attention. Thornhill's eyes twinkled. In London society, that makes you positively fascinating. Or scandalous. Often the same thing. Emma laughed, despite herself. You're very frank, Lord Thornhill. I'm too old to bother with pretense. He leaned against the column, his posture relaxed. Besides, I find honesty tends to put people at ease, and you, Miss Ashford, look like you could use a friendly face. He wasn't wrong. Emma's shoulders relaxed slightly. Thank you, that's kind. Not kind, just observant. Thornhill's gaze drifted to the dance floor, where Charles and Beatrice moved in perfect synchronization. The Duke is an old friend of mine. Known him since he was a boy. Emma's heart skipped. Oh? Difficult childhood, cruel father, the usual aristocratic tragedy. Thornhill's voice softened. I've watched him become exactly what he was taught to be. Cold, controlled, dutiful. He paused. But tonight, when he walked in with you, I saw something I haven't seen in years. What's that? Thornhill turned to look at her, his expression gentle. Life. Emma's breath caught. She didn't know what to say to that, didn't know if she should say anything at all. Be careful, Miss Ashford, Thornhill said quietly. London society is a battlefield. and you've just painted a target on your back. I'm beginning to realize that. Good. He straightened, preparing to leave. If you need an ally, you know where to find me. I have a soft spot for people brave enough to challenge the status quo. He walked away before Emma could respond, disappearing into the crowd. She turned back to the dance floor. Charles was still there, still moving through the steps with mechanical precision. But his eyes were searching the room, searching for her. When their gazes met across the distance, Emma felt it like a physical touch, a question, a promise, a warning. 6 weeks, she thought. 6 weeks of truth. It would have to be enough, because after that she'd have to learn how to say goodbye. The waltz ended. Charles escorted Lady Beatrice off the floor with the practiced courtesy of a man who'd been trained since birth in the art of obligation. Emma watched him bend slightly, murmuring something that made Beatrice smile, a sharp, satisfied smile that spoke of ownership more than affection. Emma's chest tightened. She looked away, her gaze drifting to the terrace doors. The glass panes were fogged with condensation, the winter night beyond invisible. She imagined stepping through them, disappearing into the cold dark, letting the frost numb everything she felt. But she'd promised him 6 weeks of truth, and truth meant staying. Hiding again, Miss Ashford? Emma's spine stiffened. She turned to find a young woman standing beside her, perhaps 22 or 23, with auburn hair and sharp green eyes. Her gown was yellow silk, trimmed with white lace, and her smile was curious rather than cruel. I'm not hiding, Emma said carefully, just observing. A diplomatic answer. The woman laughed, a bright sound that drew a few glances. I'm Lady Charlotte Pembroke, and you're the reason half the ballroom can't stop whispering. Emma's stomach sank. I'm not trying to cause trouble. Oh, I doubt that's true. Charlotte's eyes sparkled with mischief. No one emerges from a conservatory with the Duke of Winterbourne by accident, especially not on the first night of the year. It wasn't... Emma stopped, realizing any explanation would only make things worse. We're old friends, nothing more. Old friends who disappeared together for 20 minutes while the rest of us counted down to midnight? Charlotte raised an eyebrow. Forgive me, Miss Ashford, but that's not how London defines friendship. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. What we did or didn't do is no one's concern but our own. Perhaps. But perception is everything here. And right now, every unmarried woman in this ballroom perceives you as competition. Every married woman perceives you as a threat. And Lady Beatrice... Charlotte glanced toward where Beatrice stood in a circle of admirers, holding court like a queen. She perceives you as a problem to be eliminated. I'm not competing for anything, aren't you? The question hung between them, sharp and knowing. Emma wanted to deny it, wanted to insist that she had no claim on Charles, no intention of disrupting his life. But the lie wouldn't come. Because in the conservatory something had shifted, something had been acknowledged that couldn't be taken back. It doesn't matter what I want, Emma said quietly. The Duke is engaged. His future is decided. Engaged, yes, but the announcement hasn't been made yet. Not officially. Charlotte leaned closer, lowering her voice. There's still time for things to change. They won't. How can you be sure? Because he told me so. Charlotte studied her for a long moment, her expression softening. He told you about the engagement? Yes. And you're still here? Yes. Why? Emma's throat tightened. The answer felt too raw, too honest for a stranger. But something in Charlotte's eyes, a kindness beneath the curiosity, made her want to speak. Because 6 weeks of something real is better than a lifetime of what if, Emma said softly, echoing Charles's words. Charlotte's breath caught. Oh, Miss Ashford, you're in love with him. I don't know what I am. Emma's voice cracked slightly. I haven't seen him in 18 years. He's a stranger now. But somehow he still feels like the only person in the world who knows me. That's love, Charlotte said gently, or the beginning of it at least. Then it's a love with an expiration date. Most loves are. We just don't usually know the date in advance. Charlotte touched Emma's arm, a brief gesture of solidarity. For what it's worth, I think you're brave. Most women would have walked away the moment they heard about Lady Beatrice. Maybe they're smarter than I am. Or maybe they've never felt what you're feeling. Charlotte glanced toward the dance floor, where couples were forming for another waltz. Life is short, Miss Ashford, and passion is rare. If you have a chance at it, even for 6 weeks, I say take it. Propriety be damned. Before Emma could respond, Charlotte drifted away, absorbed back into the glittering crowd. Emma stood alone again, her mind churning. Propriety be damned. Easy words, dangerous words, the kind of words that led to scandal and ruin, but also perhaps the kind of words that led to life. Miss Ashford, Emma turned. Charles stood a few feet away, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes were anything but neutral. They burned with barely contained intensity, sweeping over her face as if confirming she was real. "Your Grace," Emma said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Would you—" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Would you walk with me?" "Where?" "The terrace. It's quieter." Emma glanced around. A dozen pairs of eyes were already watching them. If she left the ballroom with him again, the whispers would become shouts. The speculation would harden into certainty. "People will talk," she said quietly. "Let them." Charles extended his hand, palm up, an offering, a choice. "Unless you'd prefer to stay here and be stared at like an exhibit in a museum." Emma looked at his hand, at the long fingers, the faint calluses that suggested he did more than sit in drawing rooms. At the vulnerability in that simple gesture, she took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm even through the layers of gloves. He led her through the crowd, not rushing, not hiding, just walking with the quiet authority of a man who'd stopped caring what others thought. The terrace was empty, the cold keeping the other guests inside. The moment they stepped through the doors, the temperature dropped sharply. Emma shivered, her breath misting in the frigid air. Charles immediately shrugged out of his tailcoat and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was still warm from his body, carrying the scent of him, cedar and rain and something darker. "You'll freeze," Emma protested. "I'll manage." He moved to the stone balustrade, his hands gripping the edge. The moonlight caught the hard line of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. He looked like a man at war with himself. Emma joined him, standing close but not touching. Below them, the garden stretched out in shadow, bare trees, frozen fountains, pathways lost to winter. "I'm sorry," Charles said suddenly. "For what?" "For dragging you into this. For being selfish enough to ask you to stay when I know how it looks. What people will say about you. I'm not a child, Charles. I made my own choice. A choice I shouldn't have offered. But you did, and I accepted." Emma turned to face him, forcing him to look at her. "We made an agreement. 6 weeks. I intend to honor it." His eyes searched hers, dark and troubled. "Even if it ruins you? I was already ruined the day my father destroyed our name. What more can they take from me? Your chance at a future, a respectable marriage, a place in society." Emma laughed, the sound bitter. "You think I ever had those things? Charles, I'm the daughter of a traitor and a cheat. No respectable man would have me even if I begged. My future was decided 18 years ago." "That's not true." "Isn't it? Look at how they stared at me tonight. Look at how Lady Beatrice spoke to me. I'm a curiosity at best, a scandal at worst. There's no redemption for people like me." Charles's hands curled into fists on the balustrade. "You deserve better than that. Perhaps. But deserving and receiving are rarely the same thing." Emma pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders, drawing strength from its warmth. "I've made my peace with it. You should too." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because—" He turned to face her fully, his expression raw. "Because seeing you dismissed and judged and treated like you're less than them makes me want to burn this entire society to the ground." The violence in his voice startled her. This wasn't the controlled Duke. This was the angry boy who'd hidden in gardens, who'd raged against his father's cruelty. "You can't protect me from this," Emma said softly. "No matter how much you want to." "I know. But that doesn't mean I have to like it." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken things. Emma watched him wrestle with his frustration, saw the way his breathing slowly steadied, as he forced himself back under control. "Lady Beatrice seems formidable," Emma said carefully. Charles's jaw tightened. "She is. Do you—" Emma hesitated, not sure she wanted the answer. "Do you spend much time with her?" "As little as possible." "But you're engaged." "In name only." The contract was signed, the terms agreed upon, but we've barely spoken beyond pleasantries. He turned back to the gardens, his profile sharp in the moonlight. "She doesn't want a husband. She wants a title and a fortune. I'm simply the most convenient means to both." "And what do you want?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "I want—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter what I want. It matters to me." Charles looked at her then, really looked, and Emma saw something crack in his expression, something desperate and longing and utterly lost. "I want to be free," he whispered. "Free of the title, the expectations, the endless weight of a legacy I never asked for. I want to wake up in the morning and choose my own path, make my own decisions, live for myself instead of for dead men's dreams." "Then do it." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because 300 people depend on the Winterbourne estate for their livelihoods, because my mother's pension comes from the estate income, because the alliance with the Harrington family will secure trade agreements that benefit half the county." His voice grew hoarse. "Because walking away from my duty would destroy lives, and I'm not selfish enough to do that." Emma's heart ached. She understood the trap he was in. The cage built from honor and responsibility, and love for people who depended on him. "So you sacrifice yourself instead," she said quietly. "It's not a sacrifice if it's expected." "Yes, it is. It's just a sacrifice no one acknowledges." Charles exhaled slowly, the breath misting in the cold air. "You see too much. Or maybe I'm the only one willing to look." He turned to her, and the distance between them felt both infinite and non-existent. Emma could feel the heat radiating from him despite the winter cold, could see the conflict in his eyes, the war between what he wanted and what he could have. "Emma," he said softly, "what are we doing?" "I don't know. This can't end well." "I know. In 6 weeks I'll marry her, and I'll leave, go back to France or somewhere else, somewhere I can forget." The lie tasted bitter, but she said it anyway. "Will you?" "Forget." Emma wanted to say yes, wanted to promise him that this, whatever this was, would fade with time and distance, but she'd never been good at lying. "No," she whispered. "I won't." Charles closed his eyes, his jaw working. When he opened them again, they were wet with something that might have been tears if dukes were allowed to cry. "Neither will I," he said hoarsely. The confession hung between them, raw and irrevocable. Emma's hands trembled. She wanted to reach for him, to close the distance, to offer comfort or seek it. But she didn't dare. Because if she touched him now, if she let herself have even that small thing, she wasn't sure she'd be able to let go. "We should go back inside," she said, though everything in her wanted to stay. "Yes." But Charles didn't move, neither did she. They stood there in the freezing cold, two people trapped between duty and desire, counting down the days until everything fell apart. And somewhere in the ballroom behind them, Lady Beatrice laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Emma woke to grey light filtering through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was, didn't recognize the high ceiling, the rose-patterned wallpaper, the heavy furniture that spoke of old money and older tastes. Then it came flooding back. The ball, the conservatory, Charles. 6 weeks. She sat up slowly, her body aching from the rigid corseting and the late hour she'd kept. Her cousin's townhouse was quiet, the household still asleep. The clock on the mantel read 7:30. Emma rose and moved to the window, pulling back the curtain. London stretched before her, grey and cold under a winter sky. Smoke rose from 1,000 chimneys. Carriages rattled over cobblestones. The city was waking, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in ballrooms and conservatories. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, trying to organize the chaos in her mind. What had she agreed to? 6 weeks of honesty with a man she barely knew anymore. 6 weeks of stolen moments and impossible feelings. 6 weeks that would end with him marrying someone else while she what? Returned to France. Found some quiet corner of the world where she could pretend none of this had happened. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Miss Emma, her cousin's maid, a young woman named Sarah, peeked in. You're awake early. Shall I bring breakfast? Just tea, please. I'm not very hungry. Sarah's eyes were bright with barely contained curiosity. There's already talk below stairs, miss. About last night. About you and... She stopped herself, biting her lip. About me and the Duke of Winterbourne, Emma finished quietly. Yes, miss, they're saying all sorts of things. I imagine they are. Sarah hesitated. For what it's worth, miss, I think it's romantic. A childhood promise, reunited after all these years, it's like something from a novel. Novels have happy endings, Sarah. Life rarely does. The maid's face fell. No, miss, I suppose not. After Sarah left, Emma dressed herself. A simple day gown of dove-grey wool, modest and unremarkable. She pinned her blonde hair into a neat chignon, studying her reflection in the mirror. She looked tired, pale, like someone who hadn't slept properly in 18 years. She was halfway through her tea when another knock came. Miss Emma? Sarah again, slightly breathless. You have a caller. Emma's heart lurched. At this hour? He said it was urgent. He. Emma set down her teacup with trembling hands. Show him to the drawing room. I'll be down in a moment. She took her time descending the stairs, using the minutes to steady herself. It couldn't be Charles. He wouldn't call so early, so publicly. It would be scandalous, even by his standards. But when she entered the drawing room, Charles was exactly who she found. He stood by the window, still in evening clothes, wrinkled now, his cravat loosened, his hair disheveled as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, who'd walked the streets all night wrestling with demons. Charles, Emma breathed, what are you doing here? He turned at the sound of her voice. His eyes were red-rimmed, hollow with exhaustion. I couldn't stay away. People will see. Your carriage outside. I walked. You walked? Emma stared at him. From Mayfair to Bloomsbury, in evening dress at dawn? I needed to clear my head. He moved toward her, his steps unsteady. And then I found myself here, outside your cousin's house, like my feet knew where I needed to be even when my mind didn't. Emma's chest tightened. Charles, you can't... We agreed to be discreet. I know. I know what we agreed. But Emma... His voice cracked. Last night, after I left you on that terrace, I went back inside. I danced with Beatrice, I smiled and nodded and played the part of the dutiful fiancé. And the entire time, all I could think about was you, standing in the cold, wearing my coat, looking at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. Emma's hands twisted in her skirt. Charles, let me finish, please. He ran a hand through his hair, destroying what remained of its order. I went home, tried to sleep. Couldn't. All I saw when I closed my eyes was your face. All I heard was your voice saying you wouldn't forget, and I realized... He stopped, his throat working. I realized that 6 weeks isn't enough. It will never be enough. Because how do you say goodbye to someone who feels like coming home? Tears burned behind Emma's eyes. You're tired. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the night on him, cold air and exhaustion and something desperate. Tell me you don't feel it. Tell me I'm alone in this, and I'll walk away. I'll honor the agreement. I'll marry Beatrice and never bother you again. Charles, please. Tell me, Emma. She wanted to lie, wanted to protect him, protect them both from the inevitable pain, but they'd promised each other truth. I can't, she whispered. I can't tell you that. Something broke in his expression, relief and agony mixed together. Then what do? We stick to the plan, 6 weeks, no more, no less. We take what we can have and we don't ask for more. And if 6 weeks destroys us, then we find a way to survive it. Charles laughed, a broken sound. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple. It's impossible. But it's all we have. He was close enough now that Emma could see the fine lines around his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw, could feel the heat of him, the exhaustion rolling off in waves. "You should go home," she said gently. "Get some rest. We can meet later. Somewhere public. Somewhere respectable." "I don't want respectable," Charles said hoarsely. "I want you." The words landed like stones in still water. Emma's breath caught, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You can't have me. Not the way you mean." "I know." His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek. "But can I have this? Just for a moment?" Emma knew she should refuse, knew that allowing even this small intimacy would make everything harder, but she'd spent 18 years denying herself, 18 years saying no. She nodded. Charles's hand cupped her face, his palm warm against her skin. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. Emma's eyes fluttered closed, every nerve in her body focused on that single point of contact. "You're so beautiful," he whispered. "You were beautiful at 7, but now you're breathtaking. Charles, I know I shouldn't say these things, but you asked for truth, and the truth is that looking at you hurts, like staring at the sun, like wanting something so badly it burns." Emma opened her eyes, found him staring at her with such raw longing it stole her breath. "We can't do this," she whispered. "Not here, not now. Anyone could walk in. I don't care. You will. When the scandal breaks. When Lady Beatrice hears about it. When your mother—" At the mention of his mother, Charles flinched. His hand dropped from her face, the loss of contact almost painful. "You're right," he said, stepping back. "I'm not thinking clearly. I should go." "Yes." But neither of them moved. They stood there in the morning light, separated by 2 feet of space and an ocean of impossibility. "Tonight," Charles said suddenly. "There's a musicale at Lord Pembroke's house. Beatrice will be there. Half of London will be there. Come." "Charles, I don't think— Please, let me see you in a room full of people and not be able to touch you. Let me practice restraint, because right now, standing here alone with you, I have none." Emma's resolve wavered. "It will only make things harder." "I know. Come anyway." She should refuse, should protect them both from this slow torture. But the look in his eyes, desperate and pleading and so achingly vulnerable, undid her. "All right," she said softly. "I'll come." Relief flooded his face. "Thank you. But Charles, we have to be careful. We can't give them ammunition." "I know. Lady Beatrice already suspects something. If we're not careful—" "I'll be the perfect gentleman," Charles promised. Distant, polite, nothing that could be construed as improper. Emma wanted to believe him, but she'd seen the way he looked at her, the way his control frayed when they were together. "You should go," she said again, "before my cousin wakes, before the servants start talking." "Yes." But he lingered, drinking her in like a man dying of thirst. "Emma, don't say anything else. Just go." He nodded, turned toward the door, then stopped, his hand on the frame. 6 weeks, he said without looking back. "And then I'll let you go, I promise." He left before she could respond. Emma stood alone in the drawing room, her cheek still warm from his touch. Through the window she watched him walk away, a solitary figure in wrinkled evening clothes disappearing into the grey London morning. She pressed her hand to her face, touching where his hand had been. 6 weeks. It felt like both an eternity and no time at all. The musical that evening was exactly as Emma expected. Tedious, overwrought, and packed with London's elite. The Pembroke house glittered with candlelight, every surface polished to perfection. Women in jewels and silk clustered in groups, whispering behind fans. Men gathered near the refreshment tables, discussing politics and horses and other masculine concerns. Emma arrived with her cousin, Lady Margaret, who'd been delighted, if slightly scandalized, by the invitation. "You've caused quite a stir, you know," Margaret whispered as they entered. "Everyone wants to know who you are, where you came from, what your intentions are regarding the Duke." "I have no intentions," Emma said quietly. "Perhaps you should develop some before Lady Beatrice develops intentions regarding you." Emma's stomach knotted. She scanned the room, looking for, and found him. Charles stood near the piano, dressed in impeccable evening wear. Dark coat, ivory waistcoat, cravat tied with mathematical precision. He looked every inch the Duke now, composed, controlled, untouchable. But when their eyes met across the crowded room, Emma saw the truth beneath the facade. He looked exhausted, haunted, like a man barely holding himself together. Lady Beatrice stood beside him, her hand possessive on his arm. She was stunning in midnight blue silk, diamonds glittering at her throat. She leaned close to Charles, saying something that made him nod politely, but his eyes never left Emma's. The performance began, some soprano singing an aria Emma didn't recognize. She found a seat near the back, half hidden behind a column. From here she could observe without being too conspicuous. Charles sat in the front row, Beatrice beside him. Throughout the performance, Beatrice touched him, small, casual gestures, a hand on his sleeve, fingers brushing his shoulder, proprietary touches that declared ownership. Charles endured them with the patience of a man accustomed to being handled. Emma's chest ached. This was his future. This woman with her diamond-hard beauty and calculated touches. This performance of affection without feeling. The aria ended. Applause filled the room. Emma used the distraction to slip out onto the terrace, a different night, but the same cold darkness. She'd been there less than a minute when she heard footsteps behind her. "You're making a habit of this," Charlotte Pembroke said, appearing beside her. "Escaping to terraces." Emma managed to smile. "Fresh air helps." "Does it? I find it usually just gives one more time to think, and thinking is often the enemy of peace." Charlotte studied her with those sharp green eyes. "He can't stop looking at you, you know." "Who?" "Don't play coy, Miss Ashford. The Duke. Every time Lady Beatrice speaks to him, his eyes drift to wherever you are. It's quite distracting, actually. I don't think he heard a single note of that aria." Emma's hands gripped the stone balustrade. "He's engaged." "Technically. But technically isn't the same as irrevocably." Charlotte moved to stand beside her, both of them staring out at the dark gardens. "My father knows the Duke well. He says Charles has been miserable for years. Dutiful, yes. Responsible, certainly. But miserable. And then last night at our New Year's ball something changed. For the first time in years my father said Charles looked like he had something to lose." I'm not... "You don't have to explain anything to me," Charlotte said gently. "I'm not here to judge. I'm here because I think you might need a friend, and possibly a warning." Emma's stomach dropped. "What kind of warning?" "Lady Beatrice is hosting a garden party tomorrow afternoon at the Harrington estate. It's meant to be an informal introduction of Charles to her extended family. A preview of married life, so to speak." "I see. You're invited." She made sure of it. Emma turned to stare at Charlotte. "Why would she invite me?" "Because she wants to humiliate you." Charlotte's voice was matter-of-fact. "She wants everyone to see that Charles belongs to her, that you're nothing more than a momentary curiosity, a childhood friend with delusions of relevance." "Then I won't go." "That's one option, the safe option." Charlotte tilted her head. "Or you could go. You could show her that you're not afraid, that you have just as much right to be there as anyone." "I'm not brave enough for that, aren't you? You came back to England after 18 years. You walked into a ballroom full of people who judged you before you opened your mouth. You stood on a terrace with a duke and didn't apologize for existing." Charlotte smiled. "You're braver than you think, Emma Ashford." Before Emma could respond, the terrace door opened. Charles stepped through. He stopped when he saw Charlotte, his jaw tightening. "Lady Charlotte." "Your Grace." Charlotte curtsied, amused. "I was just keeping Miss Ashford company, but I see you have that well in hand now. I'll leave you to it." She swept past Charles, pausing just long enough to whisper something Emma couldn't hear. Whatever it was made Charles's expression soften slightly. Then they were alone. "You left," Charles said. "The music was loud. It was terrible." Despite everything, Emma smiled. "Yes, it was." Charles moved to the balustrade, maintaining a careful distance between them, but Emma could feel the pull of him like gravity. "Did Charlotte tell you about tomorrow?" he asked quietly. "The garden party?" "Yes. You don't have to come." "I know. Beatrice invited you to make a point, to establish dominance. It's a power play, nothing more." "I understand that." Charles finally looked at her, his eyes shadowed. "Then why do I sense you're going to attend anyway?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "Because running away is what I've done for 18 years, and I'm tired of running." Something like pride flickered across his face. "It will be unpleasant." "I expect so. Beatrice will use every opportunity to remind everyone that I'm hers." "I know. And I'll have to play along, smile, touch her hand, pretend—" His voice roughened. "Pretend she's the one I want to be standing next to." Emma's heart cracked a little more. "I know." "Then why put yourself through it?" "Because you'll be there." The admission came quietly, honestly. "And 6 weeks isn't very long. I won't waste a day hiding when I could be in the same room as you." Charles closed his eyes, his hands white-knuckled on the stone. "You're going to destroy me, Emma Ashford." "No," she said softly. "We're going to destroy each other, but at least we'll do it honestly." He laughed, a broken, painful sound. "There's a certain beauty in that, I suppose. Or a certain tragedy. Perhaps they're the same thing." The terrace door opened again. Lady Beatrice's voice drifted out, sharp and searching. "Charles? Are you out here?" Charles straightened immediately, his expression smoothing into that careful mask. "I am. Just getting air." Beatrice appeared in the doorway. Her eyes found Emma immediately, narrowing with something cold and calculating. "Miss Ashford," she said pleasantly. "How fortunate. I was hoping to speak with you." Emma's spine stiffened. "Lady Beatrice, I trust you received the invitation to tomorrow's gathering?" "I did. Thank you." "Wonderful. It will be quite intimate. Just family and close friends." Beatrice's smile sharpened. "I do hope you won't feel out of place." The message was clear. You don't belong. But Emma had survived 18 years of not belonging. She could survive one more afternoon. "I'm sure I'll manage," Emma said evenly. Beatrice's eyes flickered with something, surprise perhaps or annoyance, before her smile returned. "Splendid. Charles, darling, they're serving champagne. Shall we?" She extended her hand. Charles took it, because he had to, because duty demanded it. But as he passed Emma, his fingers brushed hers, so briefly it might have been an accident. Except Emma knew it wasn't. It was a promise. Tomorrow. "I'll see you tomorrow." She watched them walk away together, arm in arm, the perfect picture of aristocratic coupling, and Emma remained on the terrace, alone in the dark, counting down the hours until she could be in the same room as him again, even if being near him was exactly what would break her. The Harrington estate sat on the outskirts of London, sprawling and ostentatious in the way of new money trying to look old. Manicured gardens stretched in geometric precision, fountains burbled at calculated intervals, and every hedge was trimmed to within an inch of its life. Emma arrived precisely on time, her cousin Margaret beside her for moral support. The afternoon was unseasonably warm for January, winter sunlight filtering through bare tree branches. Other guests milled about the grounds, dressed in their finest afternoon wear, holding delicate teacups and speaking in hushed, elegant tones. Emma wore pale yellow, a modest day dress with long sleeves and a high collar. Her blonde hair was arranged simply, pulled back to expose the vulnerable curve of her neck. She looked exactly like what she was, someone trying very hard to appear unbothered. "You don't have to do this," Margaret whispered as they approached the gathering. "We can claim a headache. Leave right now." "No," Emma said quietly. "I need to be here." "Why? To torture yourself?" "Because he'll be here." But Emma didn't say that aloud. Lady Beatrice stood at the center of the garden like a queen holding court. She wore deep burgundy silk, the color striking against her dark hair. Diamonds glinted at her ears and throat, too much jewelry for an afternoon party, but clearly meant to make a statement. "I am wealthy, I am powerful, I am untouchable." Charles stood beside her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He wore a charcoal grey suit, his posture rigid with barely contained tension. His eyes swept the arriving guests with mechanical precision until they landed on Emma. His expression didn't change, didn't flicker. But Emma saw it anyway, the way his shoulders straightened slightly, the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands, clasped behind his back, curled into fists. "I'm here," his eyes said, "and I wish I wasn't." "Miss Ashford," Beatrice's voice carried across the garden, bright and false. "How delightful that you could join us." Every head turned. Every conversation paused. Emma felt the weight of dozens of eyes, assessing, judging, waiting to see how she'd respond. She walked forward slowly, keeping her spine straight. Margaret followed like a shadow. "Lady Beatrice," Emma said, curtsying with exact propriety, "thank you for the invitation. Your gardens are lovely." "Aren't they?" My father spared no expense. Beatrice's smile was all teeth. "Though I suppose they must seem rather grand compared to what you're accustomed to." The insult landed softly, wrapped in courtesy. "You're poor, you're beneath us." Emma met her gaze steadily. "I spent 18 years in France, Lady Beatrice. I've seen Versailles. Your gardens are lovely, but they're not quite that grand." A few nearby guests hid smiles behind teacups. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "How fortunate for you," she said coolly, "to have travelled so extensively. Though I suppose exile does provide certain opportunities." Exile. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Emma felt the shift in the crowd, the way people leaned away slightly as if scandal were contagious. "It does," Emma agreed quietly. "It teaches resilience, and the difference between courtesy and kindness." Beatrice's smile turned brittle. "How philosophical." "Charles, darling, don't you think Miss Ashford is philosophical?" Charles had been silent throughout the exchange, his expression carved from stone. Now he looked at Emma, and something flickered in his eyes. "I think Miss Ashford speaks honestly," he said quietly. "It's a rare quality." Beatrice's hand tightened on his arm. "Oh, I adore honesty. Don't you, Miss Ashford? Then let me be honest with you. I know the two of you have history, some childhood acquaintance from many years ago, but surely you understand that the past is simply that, past. Charles has moved forward with his life, as should you." The message was crystal clear. "He's mine. Accept it and leave." Emma's chest tightened. She wanted to look away, to retreat, to prove Beatrice right about her weakness. But Charlotte's words echoed in her mind. "You're braver than you think." "Of course," Emma said evenly. "We all move forward. It's the only direction available." "Quite right." Beatrice's smile returned victorious. "Now Charles and I were just about to take a turn around the fountain. Do join us, Miss Ashford. I'd love to hear more about your time in France." It was a trap. Emma could see it clearly. Beatrice wanted her close, wanted to parade Charles in front of her like a trophy, wanted to watch Emma squirm. "I'd be delighted," Emma lied. They walked together, Beatrice on Charles's arm, Emma trailing slightly behind with Margaret. Other guests followed at a discreet distance, their curiosity barely concealed. "So tell me, Miss Ashford," Beatrice said brightly, "what did you do in France all those years? I imagine life in exile was quite rustic." "I lived with my grandmother. She taught me languages, illustration, music." "How quaint. Did you work?" The question was designed to humiliate. Ladies didn't work. Only those with no other options worked. "I translated manuscripts," Emma said quietly. "Academic texts mostly, ancient languages." "Oh, so you worked." Beatrice's tone made it sound like a disease. "How very industrious." "It was necessary." "I suppose it was, when one doesn't have the benefit of family support." Beatrice glanced at Charles, her smile sharp. Fortunately, Charles would never allow his wife to work. He believes women should be protected, cherished, decorative really. Don't you, darling? Charles's jaw worked. "I believe women should do whatever fulfills them." "How progressive." Beatrice laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Though, of course, once we're married, I'll be far too busy running the household to consider anything so tedious as employment. The Winterbourne estate is quite vast. It requires a woman of breeding and education to manage properly." Unlike you, the unspoken words hung in the air. Emma's hands clenched in her skirt. She wanted to respond, to defend herself. But what could she say? Beatrice was right. Emma had no breeding by society's standards, no fortune, no claim to anything except survival. They reached the fountain, a massive marble affair with cherubs and cascading water. The afternoon sun caught the spray, creating tiny rainbows in the mist. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Beatrice sighed, leaning into Charles. "I've always loved fountains. So romantic. Charles proposed to me beside a fountain, you know." Emma's breath caught. She hadn't known. Hadn't wanted to know. "Did he?" she managed. "Well, proposed is perhaps too strong a word. The arrangement was made by our fathers, but Charles did ask formally, beside the fountain at Winterbourne Hall. It was terribly proper." Beatrice looked up at Charles, her expression fond. "He's always terribly proper, aren't you, darling?" Charles said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the fountain, his expression unreadable. "I think propriety is overrated," Charlotte's voice cut in. Emma turned to find her joining the group, her green eyes bright with mischief. "All the best love stories involve at least a little scandal." Beatrice's smile tightened. "Lady Charlotte, I didn't realize you'd arrived just now, and already bored by all the polite conversation." Charlotte winked at Emma. "Miss Ashford, would you walk with me? I want to show you the rose garden. It's supposedly quite spectacular, even in winter." "I was just—" Emma began. "Nonsense. Lady Beatrice has monopolized you quite enough." Charlotte linked arms with Emma, already pulling her away. "We'll return her shortly, I promise, mostly intact." Before Beatrice could protest, Charlotte had whisked Emma away, weaving through the other guests toward a more secluded part of the garden. "Thank you," Emma breathed once they were out of earshot. "Don't thank me yet. I just gave Beatrice even more ammunition by making it obvious you needed rescuing." Charlotte's expression turned serious. "She's worse than I expected. That woman is going to make your life miserable if you're not careful." "I know." "Do you? Because from where I was standing, you looked about 2 seconds from either crying or punching her. Neither would have ended well." Emma laughed, despite herself, a shaky, desperate sound. "Is it that obvious?" "To me, yes. To everyone else, you're doing admirably." Charlotte stopped walking, turning to face Emma. "But I have to ask, is this really worth it? Subjecting yourself to her cruelty? Watching him with her? All for 6 weeks? You don't understand. Then help me understand." Emma looked back toward the fountain, where Charles still stood with Beatrice. Even from here she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man enduring torture. "When I was 7, Emma said quietly, "my world fell apart. Everything I knew, my home, my name, my future, it all disappeared overnight. And in the middle of that chaos, there was a boy. A sad, angry boy who made me laugh, who listened to me, who made me feel like I mattered." "Charles," Charlotte said softly. "Charles. And I loved him the way children love, completely innocently, without reservation. I told him I'd marry him someday, and he said he'd remember." Emma's voice cracked slightly. "Then I left, and for 18 years, I convinced myself it was just a childhood memory, that whatever we'd had was too small and fragile to survive reality. But it wasn't. No, it wasn't." Emma turned back to Charlotte, tears burning behind her eyes. "The moment I saw him again, it was like coming home after being lost for 18 years, like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. And I know it's foolish. I know it can't last. I know he'll marry her, and I'll leave, and we'll both have to learn to live with that. But for 6 weeks, her voice broke. For 6 weeks, I get to feel like I belong somewhere, like someone sees me, really sees me, and that's worth whatever pain comes after." Charlotte's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Oh, Emma, you're in love with him." "I know. And he's in love with you." "I know that too." "Then why?" "Because love isn't enough. Not in this world. Not for people like us." Emma wiped at her eyes roughly. "He has responsibilities, people who depend on him, a legacy to protect, and I have nothing to offer except my heart, which, as it turns out, isn't worth very much in the marriage market." "That's not true." "Isn't it? Look at what Beatrice offers him. Wealth, status, political connections. What do I offer? Scandal, complications. A past he'd have to defend every day for the rest of his life. Emma shook her head. He'd be destroying himself to have me, and I love him too much to let him do that. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. You're very brave and very foolish, and I think you might be the most romantic person I've ever met. Romance is for people with options. I'm just trying to survive. Then survive with dignity. Don't let Beatrice see you break. I'll try. They walked in silence through the winter bare rose garden, the thorny branches stripped of beauty but still somehow elegant. Emma felt hollowed out, emptied by the confession, but also, strangely, lighter. Thank you, she said quietly, for listening, for not judging. I'm the last person who would judge. Charlotte smiled sadly. I know what it's like to want something you can't have, to love someone the world says is wrong for you. We're more alike than you think, Emma Ashford. Before Emma could ask what she meant, voices drifted from the path ahead. Male voices, low and serious. Can't continue like this, Charles. I'm handling it. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you're barely holding yourself together. Emma recognized the second voice, Lord Thornhill, Charles's friend from the New Year's ball. She and Charlotte froze, hidden by a hedge. I'm doing my duty, Charles said tightly, exactly as expected. Duty be damned. You're miserable, more miserable than I've ever seen you. What would you have me do, Ben? Break the engagement? Humiliate Beatrice? Destroy the alliance that will save the estate? I'd have you choose yourself for once in your bloody life. A pause. Then Charles's voice, so quiet Emma almost didn't hear it. I can't. Too many people depend on this marriage. And what about you? What about what you need? What I need doesn't matter. Like hell it doesn't, Charles. Thornhill's voice softened. I saw you with her, with Miss Ashford. I saw the way you looked at her, like she was air, and you'd been drowning. Emma's breath caught. Don't, Charles said hoarsely. You're in love with her. It doesn't matter. It's the only thing that matters. Ben, listen to me. I've known you since we were boys. I've watched you bury every emotion, every desire, every piece of yourself that didn't fit the mold your father created, and you've survived it. But surviving isn't living, Charles. And that woman, Emma, she makes you live. I can see it in you. For the first time in years, you're alive. Silence, heavy and painful. I have 6 weeks, Charles said finally. 6 weeks before the engagement is announced, before it becomes irrevocable. Then use them. Be selfish. For once, be selfish. And then what? Abandon my responsibilities? Let the estate crumble? Betray everyone who depends on me? Or maybe, just maybe, find a different solution, one that doesn't require you to sacrifice your entire life. There is no other solution. Because you haven't looked for one, because you've already resigned yourself to martyrdom. That's not fair. No. What's not fair is watching you slowly die inside while pretending it's noble. Thornhill's voice turned sharp. You want to honor your father's memory? Then don't repeat his mistakes. He married for duty and was miserable every day of his life. He took that misery out on you, on your mother, on everyone around him. Is that what you want? To become him? No. The word was barely a whisper. Then fight. Fight for something that matters. Fight for her. I can't. You mean you won't? Their footsteps faded, the conversation ending as they walked away. Emma stood frozen, Charlotte beside her, both of them processing what they'd heard. Well, Charlotte said finally. That was illuminating. Emma couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight, her chest too full of emotions she couldn't name. Charles was in love with her. She'd known it on some level, had felt it in the way he looked at her, the way he touched her face, the way his voice cracked when he said her name. But hearing it confirmed, hearing him admit it to someone else, made it real in a way that terrified her. Because if he loved her, truly loved her, then walking away in 6 weeks would destroy him, and she wasn't sure she could live with that on her conscience. We should go back, Charlotte said gently, before they notice we're missing. Emma nodded numbly, letting Charlotte guide her back toward the main gathering. but her mind was spinning, racing through possibilities and impossibilities. Find a different solution. Was there one? Could there be? Or was Thornhill's advice just beautiful optimism, the kind that crumbled under the weight of reality? They rounded the hedge and nearly collided with Charles. He stood alone on the path, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his expression haggard. When he saw Emma, something cracked in his carefully constructed facade. "Emma," he breathed. Charlotte looked between them, reading the moment with perfect clarity. "I'll just go find some refreshments. Take your time." She disappeared, leaving them alone. Emma and Charles stared at each other, the winter garden quiet around them. A breeze stirred the bare branches overhead, sending shadows dancing across his face. "Did you—" Charles stopped, swallowing hard. "Did you hear?" Emma nodded. "All of it?" "Yes." He closed his eyes, his jaw working. "Then you know. That you love me?" "Yes, I know. I'm sorry. Don't apologize for that." "Apologize for 1,000 things, but not that." Charles opened his eyes and they were raw with pain. "It doesn't change anything." "I know. In 5 weeks I'll marry her, and you'll—" "I know, Charles. I know. Then why do I feel like I'm losing something I never had the right to claim?" Emma stepped closer, close enough to see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face, close enough to feel the heat of him in the winter air. "Because feelings don't care about rights," she said softly. "They just exist, messy and inconvenient and utterly beyond our control. I wish I could give you what you deserve, a proper courtship, a future, my name. I wish that too, but wishing doesn't make it possible." Charles's hand lifted, hovering near her face, not touching, but close enough that Emma could feel the warmth of his palm. "Can I—" His voice broke. "Can I have one thing, just one moment that's real?" Emma knew what he was asking, knew it was dangerous, knew they were standing in a garden full of people who could appear at any moment, but she also knew that moments of truth were rare and precious. "Yes," she whispered. Charles's hand cupped her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. Emma's eyes fluttered closed, every nerve focused on that single point of contact. "I love you," he whispered. "I need you to know that. Whatever happens, whatever you think when this is over, I love you. I've loved you since I was 12 years old, and you promised to marry me, and I'll love you until I die." Tears slipped down Emma's cheeks. Charles caught them with his thumb, wiping them away with infinite care. "I love you too," she breathed. "I always have." For one perfect, impossible moment they stood there, his hand on her face, her tears falling freely, the truth finally spoken aloud. Then footsteps sounded on the path. Charles dropped his hand and stepped back, the distance between them suddenly vast. Lady Beatrice appeared, her expression sharp with suspicion. "There you are, Charles. I've been looking everywhere. Miss Ashford." Her eyes narrowed at Emma's tear-stained face. "Is everything quite all right?" "Fine," Emma managed. "Just allergies." "In January?" Beatrice's smile was cold. "How unfortunate. Perhaps you should go inside. Rest. You look positively exhausted. Leave, go away, stop existing." "Perhaps you're right," Emma said quietly. She looked at Charles one last time, memorizing his face. "Thank you for your hospitality, Lady Beatrice. Your grace." She walked away before either of them could respond, found Margaret, made her excuses, left the Harrington estate with her dignity intact and her heart in pieces, and tried not to think about the fact that she'd just said, "I love you," to a man she could never have. 3 days passed, 3 days during which Emma didn't see Charles, didn't hear from him, existed in a state of suspended animation, waiting for something she couldn't name. She spent the hours translating manuscripts in her cousin's library, the work mechanical and numbing. Latin declensions, Greek conjugations, ancient words that meant nothing and everything. But her mind wasn't on the work. It was in that garden, replaying the moment over and over, his hand on her face, his voice breaking. "I love you." The words had burrowed under her skin, taken root somewhere deep. She couldn't shake them, couldn't forget the way he'd looked at her, like she was everything he wanted and nothing he could have. On the 4th day, a letter arrived. Emma recognized the handwriting immediately. Bold, precise strokes that spoke of control and careful education. No signature, no return address, just 3 lines. The British Museum, reading room, 2 o'clock. Come alone, please. Emma's hands trembled as she folded the letter. Margaret was out making calls. The house was quiet. No one would notice if she slipped away. She shouldn't go. Knew it was dangerous, reckless, exactly the kind of thing that would fuel the gossip already circulating about them. But the word please, written in his hand, raw and desperate, undid her. She went. The British Museum was vast and echoing, filled with artifacts from civilizations long dead. Emma navigated the corridors with practiced ease, having spent countless hours here during her first weeks back in London. The reading room was circular and magnificent, shelves rising to an impossible height, a domed ceiling painted with clouds and sky. Tables arranged in concentric circles, scholars bent over books and papers, the air thick with the smell of leather and old paper. Emma scanned the room. Found him. Charles sat at a table near the back, partially hidden by a column. He wore simple clothes. No tailcoat, no cravat, just a dark shirt and waistcoat. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. He looked younger like this, less like a duke and more like the boy she'd known. He glanced up as she approached. Relief flooded his face. "You came," he said quietly. "You asked me to. I wasn't sure you would, after the garden party, after—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. Emma sat across from him, the table a barrier and a bridge between them. "After we said things that can't be unsaid." "Yes." She looked at him, really looked. The shadows under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. The tension in his shoulders spoke of a man at war with himself. "Why did you ask me here?" she asked softly. Charles glanced around, ensuring no one was close enough to overhear. "Because I needed to see you, to talk to you, without Beatrice hovering, without a dozen pairs of eyes watching, without pretending I feel nothing. Charles, let me finish, please." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The last 3 days have been hell. Smiling at Beatrice, planning a wedding I don't want, pretending everything is fine while I—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "While I think about you constantly, while I relive that moment in the garden, while I torture myself imagining what my life could have been if circumstances were different." Emma's chest tightened. "This isn't fair to either of us." "I know, but I had to see you. Even if it's just for an hour, even if we're surrounded by strangers and can't touch, I needed to be near you." The desperation in his voice broke something in Emma. She wanted to reach across the table to take his hand, to offer comfort. But they were in public, already conspicuous. "Tell me about France," Charles said suddenly. "Tell me what your life was like. I want to know everything I missed." Emma blinked, surprised by the request. "Why?" "Because I've spent 18 years imagining, and I need to know the truth, need to understand who you became when I wasn't there to see it." So she told him. About the small cottage outside Lyon where she'd lived with her grandmother, about learning to speak French without an accent, to think in languages that weren't her own, about the manuscripts she'd translated, philosophical treatises, botanical texts, poetry so old the ink had faded to ghosts. She told him about the loneliness, the way she'd felt suspended between 2 worlds, belonging to neither. The nights she'd stood at her window looking toward England, wondering if he'd forgotten her. Charles listened with absolute attention, his eyes never leaving her face. Occasionally he'd ask a question, quiet, thoughtful, revealing how carefully he was listening. "Were you happy?" he asked finally. Emma considered the question. "I was peaceful, content, perhaps, but happy." She shook her head. "No, I don't think I've been truly happy since I was 7 years old. Neither have I." The admission hung between them, honest and devastating. "What about you?" Emma asked. "What happened after I left?" Charles's expression darkened. "My father intensified his training. He was furious when your family disappeared, said it proved that sentimentality was weakness, that caring about people outside one's station led to nothing but disappointment. He laughed bitterly. He used you as an example for years. The foolish boy who'd attached himself to a girl from a disgraced family. The lesson about keeping one's heart properly guarded. Emma's throat constricted. I'm sorry. Don't be. It wasn't your fault. Charles's hands curled into fists on the table. He was a cruel man. He believed that suffering built character, that love was a luxury the aristocracy couldn't afford. He made sure I understood that every action has consequences, that my choices affected hundreds of people, and that personal happiness was irrelevant compared to duty. That's a terrible way to live. It's the only way I know. Charles met her gaze, his eyes hollow. He died hating me. Did I tell you that? His last words were about my failures, my weaknesses. The ways I'd disappointed him. Charles, and you know what the worst part is? Even dead, he controls me. Every decision I make, I hear his voice, telling me what's expected, what's right, what a true duke would do. His voice dropped to a whisper. Sometimes I think I'll never be free of him. Emma wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that he was his own man, that he could choose differently. But she understood the weight of legacy, the way the past wrapped around you like chains. What was your mother like? She asked, changing the subject gently. Charles's expression softened slightly. Kind, gentle, completely crushed by him. He paused. She lives in the Dower House now. Rarely comes to London. I think the city reminds her of too many unhappy years. Does she know about... Emma hesitated. About us? No. I haven't told anyone except Ben, and he guessed more than I told him. Charles studied her. Would you want to meet her? The question caught Emma off guard. I don't think that's wise. Probably not. But I want her to know you exist. Want someone in my family to understand why I... He stopped, his jaw working. Why you what? Why I'll never love Beatrice the way a husband should love his wife. The words settled over Emma like a shroud. She thought about Beatrice, cold, beautiful, calculating. Thought about Charles spending the rest of his life beside a woman he didn't love, fathering children with her, growing old in a house that would never feel like home. Maybe love will come, Emma offered weakly, with time. Do you believe that? No. Neither do I. Charles leaned back, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. But it doesn't matter what I believe. The contracts are signed. The announcement will be made in 3 weeks, and then you marry her. Yes. Emma forced herself to ask the question that had been haunting her. When is the wedding? April 15th. 3.5 months. Less than 100 days. That's soon, Emma managed. Beatrice wanted it sooner. I convinced her family that a proper wedding requires time to plan. Charles's smile was bitter. In truth, I just wanted more time before... He couldn't finish. Emma understood. More time before his life became a cage he'd never escape. They sat in silence, surrounded by the rustle of turning pages and the scratch of pens. The reading room felt like a sanctuary, a place outside of time where they could exist together without consequence. Emma, Charles said softly, can I ask you something? Yes. If things were different, if I wasn't a duke, if you weren't... He struggled to find the words. If we were just two ordinary people, would you want... Yes, Emma interrupted. Whatever you're asking, the answer is yes. Charles's eyes closed. A shudder ran through him, visible even from across the table. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. I wish I could give you ordinary, he whispered. I wish I could be just a man. Not a title, not a legacy, not the sum of everyone else's expectations. Just myself. You are yourself. Right now, in this moment. That's enough. Is it? It has to be. Charles reached across the table slowly, his hand palm up in invitation. Emma glanced around. The nearest scholar was 3 tables away, absorbed in a massive tome. No one was watching. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, solid, real. Emma felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip, felt her pulse jump at the simple contact. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined across the table, surrounded by centuries of accumulated knowledge. Two people trying to steal a moment of truth in a world built on lies. "I'm going to remember this," Charles said quietly. "When I'm old and grey and trapped in a life I never wanted, I'm going to remember this afternoon. This room, your hand in mine. And I'm going to be grateful I had it, even if I couldn't keep it." Emma's vision blurred with tears. "Charles, don't cry. Please don't cry. If you cry, I'll—" His voice broke. "I'll fall apart, and I can't afford to fall apart. Not yet." Emma blinked rapidly, forcing the tears back. "All right. No crying. Thank you." They sat in silence a while longer, hands linked, neither wanting to be the first to let go. Finally, Charles glanced at the clock on the far wall. "I should go. I'm supposed to meet Beatrice and her mother for tea. Something about floral arrangements." "For the wedding?" "Yes." Emma's stomach twisted, but she forced a smile. "Then you should go. Can't keep the bride waiting." Charles didn't smile. "Emma, it's all right. Really." She gently extracted her hand from his, the loss of contact almost painful. "We knew what this was. 6 weeks. We're barely halfway through." 3 weeks left," Charles said hollowly. 21 days until the announcement. And then we say goodbye. I don't think I'll be able to. You will. We both will. Because we don't have a choice." Charles stood slowly, gathering the books he'd been using as cover. He looked down at her, his expression torn between longing and despair. "Meet me again," he said suddenly. "Tomorrow. Hyde Park, the Serpentine Bridge. Dawn." "Dawn?" "No one will be there that early. We'll have privacy. Please." Emma knew she should refuse, knew that every meeting made the inevitable goodbye harder. But she'd never been good at denying him. "All right," she whispered. "Dawn." Relief flooded his face. "Thank you." He left without another word, disappearing into the maze of shelves. Emma sat alone at the table, her hand still warm from his touch. 3 weeks, 21 days, 504 hours, and then she'd lose him forever. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart beat beneath her palm. It hurt. Everything hurt. But at least she'd have tomorrow. At least she'd have dawn. Emma woke before the sun, dressing in the dark. She chose practical clothes, a simple walking dress in deep blue, a wool cloak against the January cold. Her blonde hair she braided simply, pinning it away from her face. The house was silent as she slipped out. London at dawn was a different city, quieter, softer, the streets mostly empty except for delivery carts and servants starting their day. Hyde Park loomed ahead, vast and shadowed. Emma entered through the gates, following the path she'd memorized during solitary walks. The Serpentine stretched before her, a ribbon of dark water reflecting the pre-dawn sky. The bridge arched over it, elegant and empty, almost empty. Charles stood at the center of the bridge, his hands on the stone railing. He wore a heavy coat, his breath misting in the frigid air. He looked like a painting, solitary, contemplative, beautiful in his sadness. He turned as Emma approached. "You came," he said, the same words as yesterday. "You asked me to," she replied, the same answer. They stood at opposite ends of the bridge, a dozen feet of space between them. The world was grey and hushed, balanced on the edge between night and day. "I couldn't sleep," Charles admitted. "After I left you yesterday, I went home, dressed for tea with Beatrice, sat through 2 hours of discussion about roses versus peonies, smiled, nodded, pretended I cared." He laughed, a broken sound. "And the entire time all I could think was that I'd rather be in that reading room with you, talking about nothing, holding your hand, being myself." Emma walked toward him slowly, closing the distance. "I couldn't sleep either." "What did you do?" "I stood at my window, watched the stars, wondered if you were looking at the same sky." "I was." Charles's eyes found hers. "I was thinking about the first time we met. Do you remember?" "Every detail." "Tell me." Emma leaned against the railing beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. "It was summer. A ball at Hawthorne Manor. I was 7. You were 12. I'd run away from my governess. and hidden in the garden. "You were crying," Charles said softly. "Your dress was torn. You had dirt on your face. My father had yelled at me, called me clumsy and stupid because I'd knocked over a vase." Emma's voice grew quiet. "I was hiding because I didn't want anyone to see me cry. And then I found you. You were hiding too from your father. He'd struck me for speaking out of turn at dinner." Charles's hand moved unconsciously to his jaw, as if feeling the ghost of a blow. "We were both running from the same thing. Pain. Yes." He turned to face her fully. "And then you said something. Do you remember what you said?" Emma smiled despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "I said, 'Why are grown-ups so mean?' And I laughed. For the first time in months, I laughed." Charles's own smile was sad and fond. "And then you took my hand and said we should make a promise. That when we grew up, we'd be different, kinder. And you'd marry me so we could be kind together." They stood close now, so close Emma could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, could count his eyelashes, could feel the warmth radiating from him despite the winter cold. "I meant it," she whispered. "Even then, I meant it." "So did I." Charles's hand lifted, hovering near her face. "Can I—" "Yes." His hand cupped her cheek, the touch achingly familiar. Emma leaned into it, her eyes fluttering closed. "Emma," he breathed, I need—" She opened her eyes, found him staring at her with such raw longing it stole her breath. "What do you need?" she whispered. "To kiss you. Just once, before I lose the right forever." Emma's heart hammered. They were alone. The sun hadn't risen yet. No one would see. But once they crossed this line, there would be no going back. "If we do this," she said quietly, "it will hurt more when we say goodbye. I know. We'll carry it with us. Forever. I know." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "But Emma, I'm going to carry you with me anyway. At least let me have this, one real moment, one honest thing in a life full of lies." Emma saw the desperation in his eyes, the need, the love. She rose on her toes and kissed him. The world stopped. For one perfect, impossible moment, nothing existed except the press of her lips against his, soft, tentative. A question and an answer all at once. Charles froze just for a heartbeat, and then his hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, fingers tangling gently in the loose strands of her hair. His other hand found her waist, pulling her closer, erasing the distance between them. The kiss deepened, not urgent, not desperate, slow, deliberate, like they were memorizing each other, like they were trying to fit a lifetime into a single moment. Emma's hands found his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him through his coat, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palms, wild and unsteady. Her own pulse roared in her ears, drowning out everything else. He tasted like morning air and something darker, coffee perhaps, or the bitterness of sleepless nights. His lips moved against hers with a tenderness that made her chest ache, not practiced or smooth, but honest, real. This wasn't a performance, this wasn't duty or obligation, this was truth. Charles pulled back slightly, just enough to breathe, his forehead resting against hers. His eyes were closed, his breathing ragged. "Emma," he whispered, her name a prayer. God, Emma. She couldn't speak, could only stand there, trembling, her hand still pressed against his chest. He kissed her again, softer this time, slower. A goodbye disguised as a greeting. Emma felt tears slip down her cheeks, hot against the winter cold. Charles tasted them, drew back with a sound like pain. "Don't cry," he murmured, his thumbs catching the tears, wiping them away with devastating gentleness. "Please don't cry. I can't help it." Her voice broke. "I'm trying not to, but I know. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, holding her against his chest. Emma buried her face in his coat, breathing in the scent of him, cedar and rain and the faint smell of smoke from morning fires. They stood like that as the sun began to rise. Golden light crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and amber. The serpentine caught the light, turning from black to silver. Birds began to sing. The city woke. And Emma held on to Charles like he was the only solid thing in a world that had stopped making sense. "We should go," Charles said finally, his voice rough, "before someone sees." "I know." But neither of them moved. "Emma." He pulled back just enough to look at her. "That kiss. I know." "No, listen." His hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "That kiss was the most honest thing I've ever done, the most real. And I want you to know, I want you to understand, that no matter what happens, no matter who I marry or where you go, that moment was mine, ours, and nothing can take it away." Emma's throat constricted. "Charles, I love you. I need to say it again. I love you, Emma Ashford. I loved you when we were children. I loved you through 18 years of absence. And I'll love you for every day I have left on this earth, even if I never get to tell you again. Don't say that. Don't make this a goodbye. It's not. Not yet. We still have 3 weeks. 3 weeks that will end with you standing at an altar beside someone else. I know." His voice cracked. "I know, and it's killing me. But Emma, I'd rather have 3 weeks of this, of us, of truth, than a lifetime of wondering what it would have felt like to kiss you." Emma closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the rawness of his confession. "You're going to break my heart. I know. And you're going to break mine. And we're both going to survive it because we don't have a choice. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be, it's just true." He kissed her forehead gently, the gesture achingly tender. "Come on. I'll walk you home before the park fills with people." They left the bridge hand in hand, walking through the awakening park like ghosts. The paths began to fill. Servants walking dogs, merchants heading to market, early riders exercising horses. Charles dropped her hand as they neared the gates, the distance between them growing with each step. By the time they reached the street, they were strangers again. 2 people who happened to be walking in the same direction. Nothing more. But Emma could still feel the imprint of his lips on hers, could still taste him, could still feel the way his hands had cradled her face like she was something precious. "I'll send word," Charles said quietly as they paused at the corner near her cousin's house. "About when we can meet again." "All right. Be careful, Emma. Beatrice is suspicious. She's been asking questions, watching me." "I will." He looked at her one last time, a look so full of longing it hurt. Then he turned and walked away, his coat billowing behind him. Emma watched until he disappeared around a corner. Then she slipped into her cousin's house, her lips still tingling, her heart in pieces. 2 days passed before the next letter arrived, 2 days during which Emma existed in a fog, replaying that kiss over and over. The feel of his hands, the taste of his lips, the way he'd held her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth. When the letter came, it was delivered by a street urchin, a boy of perhaps 10, who pressed it into Emma's hand and disappeared before she could ask questions. The handwriting was different this time, not Charles's bold strokes, but someone else's. Feminine, elegant. "Miss Ashford, I believe we should speak. There are things you need to know about Charles, about his engagement, about the future you're trying to steal. If you care for him at all, you'll meet me. The Serpentine Tea House. 3 o'clock today, come alone. Lady Beatrice Harrington." Emma's blood ran cold. Beatrice knew, or suspected. Either way, this was a summons, not an invitation. Margaret found her standing in the hallway, the letter trembling in her hands. "Emma? What's wrong?" Emma couldn't finish, couldn't explain the dread settling in her stomach like lead. "Is it from him?" Margaret asked gently. Emma shook her head. "From her?" Margaret's eyes widened. "Lady Beatrice, what does she want?" "To warn me off, I imagine. To remind me that he's hers and I'm—" Emma's voice broke. "I'm nothing." "You're not nothing. Aren't I? I have no title, no fortune, no claim to anything except a heart that won't stop loving someone I can never have." Emma looked at her cousin, desperation in her eyes. "What do I do?" "You have a choice. You can ignore the letter, refuse to meet her, or you can go, hear what she has to say. and make a decision based on truth instead of fear. Emma looked down at the letter. The elegant script seemed to mock her. The future you're trying to steal. She wasn't trying to steal anything. She'd never asked Charles to love her, never demanded a future, never expected. But that was a lie, wasn't it? Some part of her, some foolish, desperate part, had been hoping that love would be enough, that somehow, impossibly, they'd find a way. But love was never enough in this world. "I'll go," Emma said quietly. "Emma, I have to. If I don't, I'll always wonder what she would have said. What truth she might have told me that Charles couldn't." Margaret looked worried. "Then I'm coming with you," she said alone. "I don't care. I'm not letting you face that woman without support." Emma wanted to argue, but the truth was, she was grateful. Beatrice was formidable, beautiful and sharp, and utterly convinced of her own superiority. Emma wasn't sure she could face her alone. "All right," she said softly. "Thank you." The Serpentine Tea House was elegant and expensive, the kind of place where London's elite gathered to gossip over tiny sandwiches and overpriced tea. Emma and Margaret arrived exactly at 3, both dressed conservatively, armor disguised as propriety. Lady Beatrice sat at a corner table, positioned so she could see the entire room. She wore deep purple, a color that should have clashed with her coloring, but somehow didn't. Diamonds glittered at her throat. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken hours. She looked like royalty. Emma felt like a peasant. "Miss Ashford?" Beatrice said as Emma approached. Her eyes flicked to Margaret. I said alone. "Lady Margaret is my cousin. Where I go, she goes." Beatrice's lips thinned. "How loyal. Very well. Sit." It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. Emma sat, Margaret beside her. A server appeared immediately, pouring tea with practiced efficiency. Emma didn't touch hers. "Thank you for coming," Beatrice said, her tone suggesting she'd expected nothing less. "I'm sure you're wondering why I asked to meet. You made it clear in your letter. You want to warn me away from Charles." "Charles?" Beatrice's smile was cold. "How familiar. Tell me, Miss Ashford, has he asked you to call him that? Or do you simply presume intimacy that doesn't exist?" Emma's jaw tightened. "We're old friends." "So he's told me. Childhood acquaintances. A girl he knew briefly before her family's disgrace." Beatrice sipped her tea delicately. "But friends don't look at each other the way the two of you do. Friends don't disappear into conservatories and gardens and museums. Friends don't—" She paused. "Kiss on bridges at dawn." Emma's heart stopped. Beatrice smiled at her reaction. "Ah, so it's true. I'd hoped my informant was mistaken, but I can see from your face that he wasn't." "Who?" Emma's voice came out strangled. "Who told you?" "Does it matter? London is full of eyes, Miss Ashford. Servants talk, merchants gossip, someone always sees." Beatrice set down her teacup with a delicate clink. "But let's not waste time on recriminations. I didn't ask you here to shame you. I asked you here to offer you something." "What?" "The truth." Beatrice leaned forward slightly. "Charles hasn't been honest with you. He's told you about the engagement, yes. About duty and responsibility and all the noble reasons he must marry me. But has he told you everything?" Emma's stomach twisted. "What do you mean? Has he told you about the debts, the estate that's mortgaged to the hilt, the tenants who will be evicted if the Winterbourne holdings are sold?" Beatrice's eyes glittered. "Has he told you that without my dowry, his family loses everything? Not just the estate, but his mother's home, his sister's dowry, the pensions for 30 elderly servants who have nowhere else to go?" Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "I thought not," Beatrice said softly. "Charles is very good at playing the martyr, the dutiful son sacrificing his happiness for abstract honor. But the truth is far more concrete. If he breaks our engagement, he doesn't just disappoint his family, he destroys them." "That's—" Emma couldn't finish. "True, every word." Beatrice's expression softened slightly, almost pitying. "I've seen the ledgers, Miss Ashford. My father showed them to me. The Duke of Winterbourne is drowning in his father's debts. Gambling debts, bad investments, years of mismanagement. Charles has been trying to save it for 3 years, And he's failing. Emma's hands trembled in her lap. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand what you're asking him to give up. It's not just me. It's not just a marriage he doesn't want. It's his family's entire future. Hundreds of people who depend on the Winterbourne name. Beatrice paused. Do you really think your love is worth that price? The question hung in the air, brutal and unanswerable. I never asked him to give up anything, Emma whispered. Didn't you? Every time you meet him, every time you let him touch you, every time you look at him like he's your whole world, you're asking him to choose, you and suffering, or duty and survival. Beatrice's voice turned hard. And you know which one he'll choose. Deep down you know. Because Charles is a good man, a noble man, and good men don't abandon hundreds of people for one woman's happiness. Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes. She refused to let them fall. So what do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely audible. I want you to leave. Go back to France. Disappear again. Let Charles fulfill his obligations without the torture of seeing you, wanting you, knowing he can never have you. Beatrice's expression was almost kind. It's a mercy, really, for both of you. A mercy, Emma repeated hollowly. Yes, clean break. No drawn-out goodbye. No watching him marry me while you stand in the back of the church, heartbreaking. Just gone. Beatrice reached into her reticule and withdrew a small envelope. I'm prepared to help with expenses, travel, resettlement, whatever you need to start fresh somewhere else. She slid the envelope across the table. Emma stared at it, saw the bulk of it. Banknotes, probably. Enough to buy her silence, her absence, her dignity. You're offering me money to leave, Emma said slowly. I'm offering you a chance at a new life, away from a situation that can only bring you pain. Emma looked up, meeting Beatrice's eyes. And if I refuse? Then I'll make your life in London unbearable. I'll spread rumors, question your virtue, destroy what little reputation you have left. I'll make sure every door closes in your face. Every invitation is rescinded. Every friendship turns to dust. Beatrice's voice remained pleasant, conversational. And in the end, Charles will still marry me. You'll just have suffered more in the interim. Margaret's hand found Emma's under the table, squeezing gently. A reminder that she wasn't alone. Emma looked at the envelope, at Beatrice's beautiful, cold face, at the future being offered, safety in exchange for surrender. I need time, she said finally. To think. You have until the announcement. 3 weeks. Beatrice stood gracefully. Choose wisely, Miss Ashford. Some battles aren't worth fighting, especially when you've already lost. She swept out of the tea-house, leaving her untouched tea and her poisoned offer behind. Emma sat frozen, staring at the envelope. Emma, Margaret said gently, you're not seriously considering... I don't know what I'm considering. Emma's voice was hollow. She's right about one thing. I can't save him. I can only make everything harder. You love him. That's exactly the problem. Emma looked at her cousin, tears finally spilling over. I love him too much to be the reason he fails, too much to watch hundreds of people suffer because he chose me over them. Too much to... Her voice broke. To make him choose at all. Margaret's own eyes were wet. Then what will you do? Emma looked out the window at the London street, carriages and pedestrians and the endless churn of city life. Somewhere out there, Charles was going about his day, planning a wedding, fulfilling duties, carrying the weight of an empire on his shoulders, and loving her. That was the cruelest part. He loved her, and it changed nothing. I don't know, Emma whispered, but I think Beatrice might be right. The merciful thing might be to leave. Emma, let me think. Please, just let me think. They left the tea-house in silence, the envelope burning in Emma's reticule like evidence of a crime. And somewhere across London, Charles stood in his study, staring at ledgers full of debts he'd never asked for, wondering how to tell Emma that loving her was the greatest luxury he couldn't afford. And somewhere across London, Charles stood in his study, staring at ledgers full of debts he'd never asked for, wondering how to tell Emma that loving her was the greatest luxury he couldn't afford. The envelope sat in Emma's drawer that night, unopened. Beatrice's money, Beatrice's mercy. Beatrice's price for her absence. 3 weeks remained until the engagement announcement, 21 days to decide between love and duty, between staying and running, between breaking Charles's heart or watching him break his own. Emma stood at her window, staring at the London sky, and made a choice. But some choices once made can never be unmade, and some loves refuse to die quietly. What will Emma decide? Will Charles discover Beatrice's offer? Can love survive when the world demands sacrifice? The story continues in part 2. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Leave a comment telling me, should Emma stay and fight or leave to save him? I'll be reading every single one. This is only the beginning of the end.